Hey guys, so it has been a hot minute since I have sat down to film one of these Real Talk episodes for you guys on my channel. This is a bit of a mini series because I've done 3 of them before this. If you haven't checked those ones out yet, I think I did one on sleep training, one on breastfeeding, and one on transitioning from having 1 to 2 kids. But today's video is all about weaning, and I have literally been waiting almost 2 years to film this video for you. And across that entire time, I have had people asking me, have you weaned Mia yet? Have you weaned Mia yet? Are you still nursing Mia? And every time the answer has been no, 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 we're still nursing. But as of 3 weeks ago, I can officially say that Mia stopped nursing. And I am ready to share all about it with you guys and also compare it to what happened with my first daughter, Kylie, just so that you have an idea of how differently it can go with different children. So real quick disclaimer, no, I am not an expert on breastfeeding or weaning. I am just aiming to share with you what my experience was with the whole breastfeeding process and weaning each of my children off of it, in the hopes that maybe something that I tried resonates with you, and maybe it sounds like something that might work for you and your child. But you always have to keep in mind that every kid is different and every breastfeeding experience is different. So what worked for me might not work for you, and as long as we're all clear on that, then we are all good. So many experts out there will tell you that the official recommendation for breastfeeding is 2 years at minimum if you want to attain maximum health benefits. And so that was always kind of my goal in the back of my mind, that I would try to make it to 2 years. But by nature, I am also a very flexible person. I like to go with the flow and just kind of feel things out and do what feels right. And so I was trying to pay attention to my daughter's cues and also how I felt personally about the situation as we were going through our breastfeeding journey. It was a little bit different for each of my girls. My first daughter weaned a lot sooner than my second one did. And I know that many of you are probably curious exactly how that happened in each of the different scenarios, so I'm gonna share that with you guys. So with my first daughter, our breastfeeding journey had a bit of a rocky start. I had cracked and bleeding nipples, I got mastitis, I had incredible amounts of pain for weeks on end. I'm pretty sure whatever was going on was not normal. But I saw several lactation consultants and I got my hands on a recipe for some all-purpose nipple ointment, which I will leave a link to in the description box down below in case you need to check it out, because it is like magic for cracked and bleeding nipples. But once I got through all of that, the rest of our breastfeeding journey was pretty smooth sailing. And she nursed for 14 months before she was weaned. Now, as far as how I actually weaned her, I feel like with her, it was incredibly easy. Like, she was a very easy baby to wean off of the boob. She didn't seem to have like an affinity for it. It was more so she just wanted to get milk, and then that was the end of it. She didn't really nurse for comfort. So that made things a lot easier on me. And all I basically did was, as she started eating more and more solid foods, I started cutting out how many nursing sessions she had throughout the day. And back then, I feel like I was a lot more scheduled than I am now with 2 kids. And so I was able to just say, okay, she's getting milk in the morning when she wakes up, she's getting milk at her afternoon lunchtime, she's getting milk at bedtime, and that was it. And then eventually we cut out the morning feeding, and then eventually we cut out the afternoon feeding, I think was the one we did next. And then all that we were left with by the time that she was about 12 months old was her bedtime nursing, which was part of our bedtime routine. So with her, it was very specific where I actually nursed her. I had a glider out in the loft area, like just outside of her room. And I would always take her after we did like brushing teeth and everything. I would take her to the glider. She would have her nursing session for just a few minutes at that point. And then we would go in her room and read bedtime stories. And then I would tuck her in, and that was the end of it. And around the time that she was about 12 months old, maybe about 13 months, I started feeling like she didn't really care about whether or not we were nursing, because she would get excited to just jump straight to bedtime stories. So at about 13 months, I started experimenting with asking her, Kylie, do you want to go do bedtime stories, or do you want to get milk first? And a couple of times she surprised me and she said bedtime stories. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I would just kind of skip the nursing altogether and just go right into her room, and we would read bedtime stories, and I would just tuck her in the same exact order that we had always done things, just we didn't do the nursing before it all happened. And she never objected. I was always kind of worried that if I did that she would suddenly remember that she hadn't had milk yet and then ask for it after the fact, but it never happened. She would just go to sleep after the bedtime stories, and that was it. And by the time she was 14 months old, I wasn't even asking her anymore. It was just, we did brush teeth, we got in our pajamas, and then we skipped nursing. We went straight to her room, bedtime stories, and to bed. And that was basically how it happened. Like, honestly, I feel like it was the easiest thing on the face of the planet with her. And to this day, I feel so incredibly fortunate that that was my first experience with weaning a child, because I feel like it made me a lot more confident going into it the second time, kind of knowing that that could potentially be the outcome. Now with my daughter Mia, things were incredibly different. For starters, our breastfeeding journey was incredibly smooth from beginning all the way to the end. I literally had none of the problems that I had with my daughter Kylie when we first started. I had no cracked and bleeding nipples, no insane soreness, I never got mastitis. It was literally like the picture perfect experience of breastfeeding. And I am so grateful for that, because I feel like it set the stage for everything to just go smoothly from day one. Another really big difference with Mia is that I felt like she was more of an on-demand breastfeeder. Like, I would feed both of them on demand when they were breastfeeding. If they ever asked for it, they always got it. But Kylie was very attuned to a schedule just by nature. It almost seemed like she was happier on a schedule where she could anticipate when her next feeding was going to be. And she never really asked for milk outside of those normal feedings that she knew she was going to have. And so that made things really easy. Whereas Mia, on the other hand, was basically like boob, boob, boob every chance she got. Like, she asked for milk all the time. And so I felt like I spent all day feeding her every single day up through, I would say, about at least a year to a year and a half old. And honestly, I think she was like that partly because of me, because there were definitely some times where maybe she didn't necessarily need to nurse, but it was just more convenient to put her on the boob in that moment and know that she would be happy and content for a few minutes. And so I might have played a role in creating that monster myself, but that's okay. It totally worked for us. I didn't mind it at all. And she was definitely more of a comfort nurser than Kylie ever was. So again, all of this together, I think, contributes to the fact that she just nursed more on demand and more frequently each and every single day. So because of that, I found it a lot more difficult to actually start weaning her down on more of a schedule to certain set times of the day. I struggled with that a lot. Now I'm just realizing that I forgot to tell you guys about how Kylie weaned at night, like when I weaned her off of her nighttime feedings. And if we're being honest, I can't remember at this point. If I had to guess, it was probably sometime around her first birthday, because I think that was about the same time that I weaned Mia off of her night feedings as well. So for the first 12 months, yes, Mia was waking up at night for milk anywhere between 1 and maybe 3 or 4 times at night. I do remember that there was a short period of time, maybe around 6 to 8 months, where she started waking up even more frequently than that at night. I think she was getting up like 5 or 6 times a night, and I thought I was going to die, if we're being honest. Like, I was functioning on almost 0 sleep, and it was pretty bad. But she eventually dialed it back a little bit again, and she was only waking up like 2 or 3 times, maybe once. On a rare blue moon, she would actually sleep through the night, but those were incredibly rare. I could probably count on one hand the number of times that happened before her first birthday. So it was just a thing that I dealt with for the first year, knowing that I was going to be getting up usually at least once. However, around the 12-month mark, I was like, okay, she is capable of sleeping through the night at this point, and that is when I decided to wean her off of her night feedings. And so I did exactly what I did with Kylie, which was I basically just kind of decided that I was going to do it gradually by saying, okay, I'm not gonna go in and nurse her, even if she wakes up, until at least midnight. And if she woke up before that, then I would let her fuss a little bit until she put herself back to sleep, and then that was it. And if she woke up again after that, then I would go in and nurse her. And if she didn't wake up, then great, then I wouldn't have to worry about it. And then finally, after a few days, it would get to a point where she was consistently sleeping to at least that midnight time frame. And then she might wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning instead. And so at that point, that's when I said, okay, now I'm not gonna go in until at least 2 or 3 a.m. And if she woke up before that and fussed, then I would let her fuss until she put herself back to sleep, and that was the end of it. There were probably a few occasions where she started crying a little bit too much, where I felt like I needed to go in, but for the most part, it was honestly just a little bit of like complaining more so that no one was coming to give her milk, and then she was so tired that she would just fall back asleep anyway. So I never really had any of those like screaming sessions going on in the middle of the night, thankfully. And so I basically just progressed like that. I would say, okay, I'm not going until this time, I'm not going until this time, until basically it was all the way through until the morning when she would normally wake up, which is about like 5:30, 6 a.m. And to this day, she still wakes up at about like 5:30, 6 a.m. She has always been an early riser. And so when she would wake up that early, I was typically not ready to wake up yet. My husband was not up, Kylie was not up. I was like, I can't do it. So I would just take her into bed with my husband and I at that point, and then basically just co-sleep with her and nurse her for like another hour or two until Kylie woke up. And then once Kylie was up, we all got up, and that was the official start to our day. So that was how I weaned her for nighttime. I still had all of the daytime to figure out how I was going to get her onto something that resembled a little bit more of a schedule, because she was feeding so much on demand, so that I could somehow strategically wean her off of some of those feedings and get it down to just a very small number, and eventually hopefully just to the 1 feeding a day. And I wanna say that it was around 14 or 15 months where I genuinely started feeling like I was ready. I was ready to end our breastfeeding journey, even though she wasn't yet. I was ready. I just felt like I was in this place where I wanted my body back. Don't get me wrong, I 100% enjoyed breastfeeding my girls, and I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to do so, because I know that there are many mothers out there who want to breastfeed and for any various number of reasons are not able to, which breaks my heart because it is such an incredible experience. And so I feel fortunate and grateful that I even had the opportunity. But I definitely got to a point where I just felt like in my heart, I was ready for the breastfeeding journey to end. And so I started looking for ways to help make that transition as smooth and as gentle as possible for Mia. So I decided up front that the 1 feeding that I was most likely going to keep all the way till the end was actually the morning feeding for her. With Kylie, it was her bedtime feeding, but Mia just genuinely seemed to look forward to that nursing session as like the starting point of her day. And if we're being honest, I really enjoyed having the extra hour, hour and a half of sleep while she was in bed with me. Even though I wasn't like getting great sleep, it was still some sleep, and I was like, I'll take it no matter what it is. So I enjoyed it, and it was working for both of us at the time. So I was like, let's keep the morning feeding and then kind of figure out what to do with the rest of them. And so that's how I would start out each day, was with that morning feeding. And then I would aim to try to hold her off as long as I possibly could. Like, she was asking me all the time, but I would try to like redirect her to another activity or distract her with something else that was happening. I would try to figure out a way to get her attention and her focus off of the boob for 5 seconds, long enough to get her to start thinking about something else so that she would stop asking. And I would try to do that as many times as I could to try to eventually get her all the way to lunchtime. And I would say it took a few weeks before she became accustomed to this idea of milk doesn't happen on demand every single time I ask. But it was pretty smooth. There were no tears, there was nothing of that sort. She just kind of learned eventually, like, I'm not always going to get it when I ask. And so she was able to wait all the way until lunchtime, and then she would get her milk. Then we would do the same thing all the way up until bedtime. If she would ask, I would try to redirect her and distract her attention to something else, and then she knew that at bedtime every single night, she would always get milk. And that was how it was for a few months. We did those 3 feedings a day, morning, lunch, and then bedtime bedtime. And then I think it was around 18 months where I decided to cut out the middle of the day feeding altogether, because she was only asking me at very infrequent times, if at all. Sometimes she wouldn't ask me at all throughout the day. And so I felt like she was ready. So one day I just stopped giving her milk at lunchtime, and that was the end of it. And she never actually asked for it, which was great. So I got her down to 2 feedings a day, somewhere around that 18-month mark. And then very quickly after that, I realized that there were a few nights at bedtime where she completely forgot about nursing altogether. She didn't ask for it. There was actually one night that I forgot too, and I put her to bed and shut the door, and then I realized, oh my gosh, and I looked at my husband and I was like, oh, I didn't give Mia any milk and she didn't ask for it. And he was like, oh, cool. And that was like the first time that I was like, okay, I think we're ready to start dropping that nighttime feeding. And I do think it's worth noting that with Mia, I did things at bedtime a little differently. I didn't have the glider out in the loft at this point. It was just us going into her room. We would nurse a little bit, and then we would do bedtime stories in her room, and then I would put her to bed. So it was slightly different in the sense that I was nursing and doing the bedtime routine and everything all in one location for her. And so I was kind of nervous, like how was I going to cut out the nursing part of it without her noticing? But like I said, she just kind of started forgetting from time to time. And there was a short transition period during this time where on some nights, I would just skip the nursing because I knew she was capable of going without it, and I would jump right into bedtime stories. But then she would remember and she'd say boobie, because that was how she asked me. And so she would say boobie, boobie, and then I'd be like, okay. And so I'd give her some milk and put her to bed. But it only happened on occasion. And then it eventually just got to the point over a couple of weeks where she didn't ask at all. So I wasn't offering, she wasn't asking, and it just became the new thing that we just did bedtime stories and she went to bed. So we were officially down to only 1 feeding a day, which finally brings me to what I did to actually wean her off completely, off of that very last feeding that we were having in the morning still, which I was honestly dreading because I needed the extra sleep. And I'm like, oh my goodness, if she's gonna get upset about not having milk first thing in the morning and it's 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, that's not gonna be a very good start to my day. But about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I genuinely felt like there was a good chance that if I used the same strategy that I had been using at nighttime, where I just basically didn't offer and I waited to see if she would ask, I felt like if I tried that in the morning, I didn't really have anything to lose. So I was like, let's just give it a go and see what happens. And so one morning she woke up, I brought her into bed, I laid her down next to me, and instead of just immediately offering her milk, which is what I always did because that was our routine, I instead kept myself covered up, and I think I actually like rolled over the other direction so that I wasn't facing her, but like she was still like physically in contact with the other side of me. And I think I heard her say like boobie, like she kind of asked once. I just kind of pretended that I was still sleeping and that I didn't hear her, just to see if she would keep asking or if she would just accept it. And she just accepted it and she didn't ask again. And she actually went to sleep next to me for like another hour. And I woke up, A, feeling like a new woman, and B, feeling like, yes, we finally did it. And that was basically it. Every morning after that, I did the same thing. I would just bring her into bed and not offer. And I think maybe 1 or 2 times after that ever, she actually asked, but I responded the same way, where I was just kind of like staying asleep and not really responding. And she never really pursued it, and that was it. And eventually she stopped asking altogether. And so now, today, that is our routine. She wakes up in the morning if it's still really early, and she comes and she gets like an extra half hour, hour of sleep next to me in the bed. Sometimes she'll just kind of roll around and play in the bed next to me, and just entertain herself for a little bit until I wake up or until Kylie comes into our room for the morning. But it is not about the milk anymore. She is officially 100% weaned at 21 months old. So I think that about sums up everything that I have to share with you about my weaning experiences with each of my girls. If you have anything to add to the discussion, please feel free to drop it in the comments down below. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.